The thing I like about this leader is that he's part of our community. Let's see here. Let me get my senators right. Senator Jeff Merkley of Oregon shares a very special connection to the Global Ties Network as a previous president of the World Affairs Council in Portland, now World Oregon. Senator Merkley, we're so happy you can take a few minutes to join us, and please come on up.
Well, greetings, everyone. I'm delighted to come by and share a few minutes with you, and I'm pleased that Derek Olson, the president of World Oregon, is here, and Amy Bars, the head of the International Visitors Leadership Program, is here. Where are you? Amy and Derek? Yay, Oregon. We're all about international visitors, and I know all of you are across the country. And the world is in a very strange place right now. This morning I was attending a panel dialogue that included the president of the Council on Foreign Relations, Richard Hess, and he handed out his book. I don't know just how recently it came out, but I gather recently, A World in Disarray. Though that kind of sums up where we're at right now. The threat of a nuclear-armed North Korea, Russia undermining the integrity of elections in the Western world in a whole variety of ways, broader cyber security threats that affect the control of infrastructure, our financial system, intellectual property, an incredibly fractured Middle East, terrorist movements that are accelerated by social media and equipped with a wide range of evolving weapons and tactics, climate chaos, which we see impacting our farming and our fishing and our forests. And we really had a message from Mother Nature this last year in terms of more powerful hurricanes, more intense droughts, fiercer fires in the West. And that's just like the start of the list. I'm sure you all could amplify on that a couple times. It's very easy to be overwhelmed by all of that. But these represent international challenges, world challenges. And the only way we're able to address such challenges is to work together in partnership with the world, with greater dialogue and greater understanding, greater cooperation. Senator William Fulbright once said, "The rapprochement of peoples is only possible when differences of culture and outlook are respected and appreciated rather than feared and condemned, when the common bond of human dignity is recognized as the essential bond for a peaceful world." Now, speaking of Senator Fulbright, his story is instructional. He grew up in a small town, and he hadn't seen much of the world before winning a Fulbright, not a Fulbright scholarship, a Rhodes Scholarship, and which took him abroad, took him to England, and he gained exposure to great diversity of opinion and styles and world issues. And it made him recognize that exposure is a significant factor in being able to understand issues and partner with others. And that led him, as a freshman senator, to sneak an amendment onto a bill, and that amendment created a scholarship program for American students to study abroad, which we've all come to know as the Fulbright program. He wanted to have more Americans have the kind of insights that he had had from his experience. Now, one of his colleagues was very upset about the way he moved this amendment very quietly and effectively without broad discussion, and angrily told him, this is Senator Kenneth McKellar of Tennessee, said, "Don't you know it's very dangerous to send our fine young boys and girls abroad and expose them to those foreign isms?" Well, Senator Fulbright didn't think it was dangerous. He thought it was necessary, important to create understanding and cooperation. And certainly the scholarship program continues to carry on that that legacy, that vision, as do all of you in Global Ties through your work with the International Visitor Leadership Program. Create dialogue and create understanding and show people from around the world the real America with its diversity, with its opportunity, with its seemingly endless contradictions, all of which contributes to the common bond of human aspiration and dignity, the recognition of that. Now, I feel a little bit of a kinship to Senator Fulbright. I grew up in a blue-collar community. I didn't know anyone in my neighborhood who had gone to college. Nobody in my family had gone to college. The international travel was not something ever mentioned, and as far as I know, not undertaken. My parents did drive down to Mexico shortly after they were married. That was the extent of my family's international experience. And yet, when I was in 6th grade, a young woman came into my classroom. I don't know how the arrangement was made, but she had been an AFS exchange student to Japan. And she relayed her experiences spending a summer there in Japan, and I thought, that is so cool. And I went home and told my mother that, hey, I really want to apply to that AFS program when I'm in high school. And the requirement is I take 2 years of a language. I'd never considered studying a language before. I took 2 years of Spanish in order to qualify. And when I was being interviewed, I was asked the question, if you were selected for this program, where would you want to go? And I replied, well, it's a strange question, because my understanding is that in applying, you're saying, I will go wherever you send me. And the woman interviewing me said, yes, that's right. But it's still interesting to hear how people would respond. I said, well, I'd want to go someplace I'd never otherwise have the chance to go, someplace like Africa. And she was very surprised, because she'd been interviewing students for 10 years, and nobody had ever said, you want to go to Africa? And she asked me why, and I explained why. And lo and behold, I did get chosen, which was a wonderful, fortuitous event in my life. And I was one of 6 Americans sent through AFS to Africa, outside a group that went to South Africa, which at that point was still apartheid South Africa. So a summer in Ghana, 5 went to cities. I went to a small town. And my family was a very ordinary Ghanaian middle-class family. Not a lot of middle-class families in Ghana, but they were both school teachers. But what did middle class mean for them? Well, it meant that they had a 3-room concrete house because one of them was a teacher for the government, and the government had built a series of concrete houses. It meant that they had an electrical outlet, and they had one appliance, which was an iron. And so every night, my host father proudly set up the ironing board and ironed every article of clothing for the family for the next day. And so that was just part of the evening routine. And they had a bicycle, and the bicycle was an item of enormous pride. I wanted to borrow it to ride out to a little tiny thatched hut, 10-house village to seek to get an enwaba, a tree snail, because it was one thing that I had not been able to eat when I had first arrived in Ghana, when it had been plopped down in the middle of my plate, and it looked not like a snail, but like a big slug sitting in the middle of the plate. And I was determined to overcome that culinary incident. And my host mother said, well, if you can find one, if you can get me one, she would cook it. But it took me quite a long time to convince my host father that I would carefully protect his bicycle riding out along into the countryside. And because that's how much it meant. And I think about how this community did have a community room that had been built at some point in the past at the end of the soccer field. And that community room had a table tennis table in it. And my host father had played some table tennis, and I'd grown up playing table tennis, and we wanted to play. But we couldn't play because we didn't have a table tennis ball. And nobody had a table tennis ball that we knew. And somehow in the course of the summer, my host father procured one. And he was so happy, and he showed me this ball, and I'm like, great. And we go to the table tennis table in the community room, and we are about half a game in when I miss, and the ball goes behind me, and I step backwards to grab it. Smack. Crushed that thing. So we got about 10 minutes of table tennis, and that was the end of table tennis for the summer. But there's so many things that struck me about this experience. The incredible color of the clothing. You come back to America, and now you're all finely clothed, but let me just say, you're very dull. The color, the beautiful, beautiful patterns, the music, the drummings, the dancing, the community celebrations, just a whole different world from America. And it was a country that had gone through a whole series of coups in its experience with pursuing independence. It was one of the first African states. And I learned a great deal about colonial history and the response and the legacy and the impact. One of the things I was surprised to discover was that in the museum, there were relics from the British activities in Ghana that involved a bit of a war. And who commanded that war? Lord Baden-Powell. Well, who was Lord Baden-Powell? Lord Baden-Powell founded Boy Scouts. I'd grown up in Boy Scouts. I had no idea of his colonial involvement. And then, to my great surprise, it was 1973. To my great surprise, I go to the first community parade drumming celebration of a local holiday, and out of nowhere, a scout troop appears. And this scout troop proceeded to have walking sticks, and they held the both ends, and they held the crowd back from the dancers parading through the street. Now, the reason I was so surprised to see these Boy Scouts is Boy Scouts had been banned for a significant period of Ghana's history because they had come under the sphere of Soviet influence. And they had young pioneers, but they didn't have Boy Scouts. And I had read about this in preparation for going. And so where did this Boy Scout troop come from? Well, it turned out just months before I arrived as an exchange student, the government had changed its position, and an elderly man, he's probably approaching 70, now that I'm over 60, not so elderly, okay, but at the time, as a youngster, seemed quite old, but he had been a commissioner for African Scouting way back in the 1940s. And so he immediately, when the band was listed, started a scout troop, this first one in Ghana. But all their experience was young pioneer experience, marching. So they invited me to join them for the summer, and every week I went with them, and we did a whole variety of games and knots and splices and songs and all kinds of things. It was just a wonderful chance to be a partner with the teenagers, the youth in the small town. Well, I say this just to paint a portrait of what an incredible experience it is for our young people to go abroad. A totally unexpected set of experiences, and to understand the world through such a different lens, to be surrounded by families that earned $1 a day. The parent earned $1 a day working, and could barely pay, if you will, for the absolute minimum to feed the family, which meant the children had to work, and the children are selling candy through the bus windows or delivering bread door to door, and so on and so forth. This gave me a really deep interest in world affairs and world poverty, and I'm pleased that in Fulbright and AFS and Rotary, so much exchange is happening, but it's so important to have the rest of the world come to here in America, and you all are doing such a fabulous job on that side of the equation. Out in Oregon, when I worked with then World Affairs Council of Oregon, but now I think World Oregon, renamed, and they host 500 to 600 visitors a year. Amy, is that still the right number, ballpark? Okay. And in so many different fields, and visiting, most of those visitors visit 3 states. We do try to remind them that to save all their money, spend it in Oregon, because Oregon does not have a sales tax. This has become a widely known fact among the international community. Come to Oregon, make your dollars go further. When I was first at the council, I went down to the state legislature to ask the state legislature to invest in $50,000 a year to help us with the IVP, then IVP, now IVLP program. And the reason why was, and I laid out all the expenses the federal government helps cover, and then all we have to do is facilitate their coming to Oregon, and look at all the values that flow from that, all the connections that flow from that. For us, the value to us as Oregonians. And also, of course, I knew the enormous value of the connections and bonds in terms of foreign policy and international affairs. So what a beautiful double win. So I was appalled when the Trump budget came out this year and cut, well, let's see, it was about $360 million out of the Cultural Exchange Program budget. And I was pleased to team up in a bipartisan way with my colleagues, and we restored that budget to the same level for FY18 from the Senate side. But here's the thing. Right now, we're still under a continuing resolution, which meant we're just continuing FY17. So that was the Senate mark. We need to make sure that the Senate mark, or better, becomes the common congressional mark in the next day or two as we proceed to pass a spending bill. The importance reverberates in so many ways. I was struck by how often I've heard in the course of affairs here people bragging about not having ever been out of the U.S. And, well, I don't even have a passport, and I'm proud of it, or that kind of attitude. The same attitude we heard of kind of from the senator back who served with Fulbright, who was concerned about the impact of Americans going abroad. And I probably would have been equally concerned about the impact of sponsoring foreigners to come to the United States. And there is a moment in terms of the treatment of the State Department I'm very concerned about, where the role of our diplomats who have these decades of experience, or their role, their knowledge is often disregarded, devalued, or dismissed. And we really need that international understanding to help inform our foreign policy, to help address this world in disarray. And so I was pleased in December, just a couple months ago, to partner with Senator Bozeman of Arkansas to introduce a resolution recognizing the importance and expressing the Senate's support for international exchange programs. We had 26 co-sponsors, bipartisan support, and it was passed unanimously by the Senate as an affirmation of how important the work is that all of you do. So thank you for contributing to the world and the solution of big challenges by facilitating the interaction between folks around the world and Americans in town after town, in state after state. Well done, and I look forward to doing everything I can to continue to support your efforts. Thank you.